Welcome to SplitSecond. If you want to buy the best sleeves or other magic-related accessories, head down to Dragon Shield using the affiliate link below.
This week we bring you some new commanders from the new set, Murders at Karlov Manor. David is playing Elok 888's Melek Reforged Researcher, a deck focused on growing his commander enough to kill players through combat and if needed flinging in any possible way. Josh is playing Elk Turtle Turbo, a list from our other friend Josh from Elder Drunken Highlander. Elder is going third, playing Duskana, the Rage Mother, a deck revolving around hate bears and Duskana's ability to draw cards and pump the tin for lethal. Finally, Bal built a mid-range Niv-Mizzet Guildpact, hoping to draw a lot of cards and control the board with his commander. David kept his first 7 with a lucky Leyline of Anticipation, Regular and Volcanic Island for lands, with Arcane Signet and Strike It Reach for ramp. Consider is a decent cantrip and Mindbreak Trap is great for those storming opponents. Control hand just the way he likes it. Josh mulliganed once and didn't want to go lower, as he has some ramp alongside that mana Confluence. Soul Ring into Armored Scrapgorger can still allow him to play with that Thrasios. Mental Misstep for some interaction, Born Upon a Win for value and possible instant speed wins, and Finale of Devastation is most of the time used as a finisher. Elder also kept his first 7, greedy one-lander, but with the Lotus Petal it can bring out that Carpet of Flowers and Avacyn's Pilgrim, considering he's playing third after the 2 blue guild decks. Archivist of Ogma for some card advantage and Circle of Dreams Druid will be great to help cast his commander on any other creatures. Finally, Bal kept his first 7 as well, happy to have Lightning Greaves in hand as a great enabler. Savannah and City of Brass for lands, considering Ottawar Sea of Clouds is mostly a removal non-spell. Fiend Artisan helps tutor for key creatures into play and that Vampiric Tutor can help him pivot his game plan. Ready for the match? Before the game starts, David puts a Leyline of Anticipation into play. He then starts his turn simply by playing a Volcanic Island and passing. Josh plays a Mana Confluence and casts a Sol Ring, also passing. Elder rejoices with a top deck land. He plays a City of Brass and casts a Carpet of Flowers. This way he doesn't need the Lotus Petal he is casting for green mana. He then proceeds to his second main phase, adding green from Carpet to cast Avacyn's Pilgrim and passes. Bal plays a City of Brass and passes. In the end step, David casts a Strike It Reach, and Bal takes the opportunity to cast Vampiric Tutor in response. However, Josh slows him down with a Mental Misstep. All Bal wanted was a Bloom Tender, but that won't do. David then gets his treasure and goes to his turn. He plays an island and actually plays a Sorcery Speed, a Rhystic Study that he wants in play a Zap. Josh fails a land drop and casts a Armored Scrapgorger, triggering Rhystic and paying for it, passing the turn. Elder draws, adds 2 green with Carpet and plays an untapped Sacred Foundry, paying 2 life. He casts a Circle of Dreams Druid, triggering Rhystic and paying for it, ending his turn. Bal plays a Badlands and casts a Fiend Artisan, triggering Rhystic and not paying for it, and passing. David plays a Wooded Foothills and passes. Most of his turns will be these uneventful, thanks to the Leyline. Josh gets to his turn and still no lands. He exiles Strike It Reach with Armored Scrapgorger to help cast Thrasios Triton Hero, triggering Rhystic and he pays for it. Elder found an Enlightened Tutor, but Rhystic prevents any of his attempts at comboing with Food Chain, so he doesn't cast it in the end step and proceeds to his turn. He adds 2 white with his Carpet of Flowers and casts a Sterling Grove, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. Bal draws, plays a Mana Confluence, casts Lightning Greaves, triggering Rhystic and not paying for it, as he found a Source of Plowshares. In the end step, David cracks Wooded Foothills for a mountain, and Elder responds by flashing in an Archivist of Ogma. David gets a mountain and Elder draws from the Archivist. Still in the end step, David casts an Arcane Signet, and follows it with a Senses Divine in top, also activating it, rearranging the top 3 and going to his turn. He draws, plays a tapped Jori Ruins, and as usual, he passes. Josh finally found the land he needed. He plays Exotic Orchard, and taps a Scrapgorger to help cast his commander, the Pride of Clade, triggering Rhystic and unable to pay for it. In the end step, Elder cracks his Sterling Grove to go find a Smothering Tithe to the top of his deck. Goes to his turn and draws it, gets 2 white from the Carpet to help cast Recruiter of the Guard. Rhystic triggers and he pays. He goes to find Dockside Extortionist. Now with 4 creatures, his Circle of Dreams Druid taps for 4 green to help cast Cloudstone Curio, his other signature spell. Rhystic triggers and he pays for it. It actually resolves this non-creature spell, so the table is fearing for their lives. However, as he now casts Dockside Extortionist, David responds with a Mindbreak Trap. Although harder to counter a Dockside for being a creature, being the 3rd spell cast costs him his Dockside forever. He sadly passes. Bal is flooding a bit. He plays a Savannah and casts Talion. Rhystic triggers and he can't pay for it. It resolves and he chooses 2. Then he equips Talion with Lightning Greaves and passes. On his end step, David casts a Mana Vault and activates Senses Divine in top before going to his turn. David plays an island and once again passes. Josh fails to draw a land once again. He activates his commander Pride of Clade, exiling David's Mindbreak Trap and proceeds to attack Elder, which doesn't feel like blocking. Not only can he reuse Recruiter of the Guard, with Clawstone, Archivist also draws him cards by itself and from Duskana. However, after no blocks are declared, David fires an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. Josh responds with Fierce Guardianship, triggering Rhystic. In response, David casts a Consider, looking for answers. He surveils Ponder to his graveyard, and still in response to the Rhystic trigger, he activates Senses Divining Top. He found it. He casts a Force of Negation, pitching a Tolarian Winds. However, that's his third spell for the turn, and it is now Josh who casts a Mindbreak Trap. The table is saved. However, safe is not quite the word, as Josh now draws 15 cards from his commander trigger. He plays a tropical island. However, he didn't find any good payoffs he wanted for this scenario, and with Rhystic Study in play, he is still somewhat constrained back to the wall. He casts a Chrome Mox, triggering Rhystic and not paying, imprinting a Born Upon the Wind, and follows it with a Managorger Hydra, triggering Rhystic again but not paying. He still exiles an Elder Spirit Guide to cast a Birds of Paradise, before going to cleanup, and we're back to Elder. He draws and his Carpet produces 3 white mana, which allows him to cast Smothering Tide, triggering and paying for the Rhystic. However, that Hydra is starting to grow. The Tide resolves and enters play, triggering Cloudstone Curio, and he returns his Carpet of Flowers back to his hand. Circle of Dreams Druid taps for 4 green to recast Carpet of Flowers, triggering Rhystic and the Hydra, and he does pay for the Rhystic. He also casts Arbor Elf, once again triggering Rhystic and the Hydra, and he keeps it safe, paying for the Rhystic. While each of David's draws would provide him with treasures, he can't just feed his opposing blue mages on a Naya deck. Arbor Elf enters play, triggering Cloudstone Curio, and he returns Recruiter of the Guard back to his hand. He now proceeds to his second main phase, where the new Carpet of Flowers once again triggers for 3 white mana, and he recasts Recruiter of the Guard, triggering Rhystic and the Hydra, and he pays for it. It enters play, triggering itself and Cloudstone Curio. He returns Arbor Elf back to his hand so he can keep reusing the Recruiter, and with its trigger he finds Delnay's Streetwise Lookout, ending the turn. Bal draws, triggering the Tithe, and doesn't pay. He plays a Tundra and casts his commander, Niv-Mizzet Guildpact, triggering Rhystic and the Hydra, and it doesn't pay for the Rhystic, which in turn provides another treasure to Elder as David draws. He then equips his commander with Lightning Greaves and proceeds to combat, sending Niv towards David while he is tapped out. Niv-Mizzet triggers and he deals 2 damage to the Recruiter of the Guard, draws 2 cards and gains 2 life, triggering Smothering Tithe for 2 more treasures. He found a Mox Diamond that he casts, triggering Rhystic and the Hydra, and he can't pay. David draws and Elder gets another treasure. He discards Yavimaya Cradle of Growth and passes. David untaps and activates Senses Divining Top in the upkeep. He draws, takes 1 from his mana vault, and Elder gets another treasure from the Tithe, as David doesn't pay. At this moment, Elder mostly needs payoffs, not exactly mana. David casts a Mystic Remora, triggering the Hydra, and then he passes. Josh starts his turn, asking if Elder wants 15 treasures. And it's a tough call, since Elder doesn't want Josh to get too far ahead, he also wants his Ogma alive for his next turn. After some convincing, Josh activates his commander on itself and attacks Elder with it and Bal with the Hydra. No blockers are declared, and David responds with a Chaos Warp on Josh's commander, triggering the Hydra. Josh responds by activating his commander and targeting the Managorger Hydra, which is a 10-10 at the moment. In response still, Bal fires his Swords to Plowshares on the Managorger Hydra, triggering Rhystic, Remora and the Hydra, and unable to pay for any of that. Josh gains 11 life and Warp finally resolves, revealing a Scalding Tarn. He then goes to his second main phase and plays a Waterlogged Grove. He casts a Llanowar Elves, triggering Rhystic, and he cracks the Tarn in response to find an untapped Breeding Pool, paying 2 life. Archivist triggers and Elder draws, and then Josh pays for the Rhystic. In the end step, Elder casts a Whirly Tutor, triggering Rhystic and Remora, and he pays for none, so David draws 2 and Elder gets 2 treasures back from his Tithe. He looks for an Imperial Recruiter and proceeds to his turn. He draws the Recruiter and his Carpet produces 3 red mana. He casts the Recruiter, triggering Rhystic, and he pays for it. At this moment, Bal is cursing for his decision to choose 2 on Talion. While it is usually the best first option, at this moment in time there would have been so many more triggers on 1 than on 2. Perhaps playing against 2 creature-based decks, it's simply better to choose 1. Elder finds a Lorand of the Third Path, and the Cloudstone Curio triggers has in return his Avaricious Pilgrim back to his hand. He now casts Lorand of the Third Path, triggering Talion for the first time. Rhystic triggers and he pays for it. And when it enters play, he destroys Rhystic Study. Thank God we don't have to talk about any more triggers. Wait, Elder casts Imperial Recruiter, entering play and triggering. He could find Squee and try to go for it while everyone is mostly tapped out, but Talion is on 2, so that wouldn't work well for his life total. He finds Grand Abolisher to his hand and Cloudstone Curio returns him Lorand back to his hand. He passes with 6 juicy cards ready to go for it next turn. Bal gets to his turn, draws and doesn't pay for the Tithe. He casts Lotho Corrupt Sheriff and follows it with Fabor Elder, triggering Lotho for a treasure and losing 1 life. He then goes to combat and attacks Josh with his commander, triggering and dealing 4 damage to Imperial Recruiter and drawing 4 cards and gaining 4 life. Smothering Tithe triggers for 4 treasures. Bal then plays a Polluted Delta and cracks it for an Underground Sea. Archivist of Augment triggers and Elder draws a card. Bal then equips Favor Elder with Lightning Greaves and taps it for Urabuga. Remember Crash Bandicoot? He proceeds to cast Keenan, followed by Sig River Cutthroat, and finishing with a Drenith Magistrate, which he promptly equips with Lightning Greaves before passing. Because Josh took 6 from Niv, Sig triggers. David responds by activating the top, and then Bal draws a card, ending his turn. David untaps and pays for the Remora to stay. He draws and loses 1 from the vault. He plays a mountain and casts Dragon's Rage Channeler. He follows it with a Mana Crypt, triggering DRC and Lotho, and he keeps the card on top. He goes to clean up, discarding only 1 card. However, once his graveyard is now getting juicy for his commander to do something, Drenith just came down. First half of the match taxed by Scrap Gorger, and now this pesky Drenith with Shroud. Josh gets to his turn, and without much to do, he casts a Bribery targeting Bal. Remora triggers, David draws, Tithe triggers, Elder gets a treasure. Everyone gets something but Bal, who is robbed of his Dockside Extortionist. It enters play under Josh's control, triggering, and after some math and social stack, no one cracks any treasures, and Josh creates a whopping 28 treasures. GG. With all that, he goes for a Birthing Pod, triggering Lotho and Remora, and actually paying for it. Why not? He then activates the pod, paying 2 life and sacrificing Landward Elves as an additional cost. He searches for a Flash Duplicant, entering play as a copy of Dockside Extortionist, triggering as well as Archivist of Ogma and Elder draws. He creates another 29 treasures, and with all that mana, he casts a Card of Calling X=7, saying he wants to have his options open, while he's damn sure what he wants at this point. Remora triggers, and he pays for it again. It resolves, and with it, a big codfish hits play, Hullbreaker Horror enters play, and players start understanding where this is going. Archivist triggers again, and the table wishes Elder starts drawing into those silences, or some removal hopefully. Josh now casts a Consecrated Sphinx, triggering Hullbreaker Aura and choosing to bounce Talion back to Bal's hand, as he wants to loop Flash Duplicant as a copy of Dockside, and Talion would kill him in the process. He now casts a cEDH Fateful, triggering Hullbreaker Horror and choosing to bounce Flash Duplicate back to his hand. He now recasts Flash Duplicant, triggering Hullbreaker Horror and choosing to bounce cEDH Faithful back to his hand. However, Bal now responds by channeling an Auto Aura on his own Dockside, controlled by Josh. This way, he stops the Dockside cloning loop. cEDH Faithful is returned to Josh's hand, and Flash Duplicant now enters as a copy of Keenan, so his 30 treasures now tap for a total of 60 mana. He once again casts cEDH Faithful, triggering Hullbreaker Aura and choosing to bounce Ley Line of Anticipation. In response, David activates Sensei's Divining Top to look and rearrange his top of the library. He found something, so he asks if someone can trigger his Remora, and Elder fires his Enlightened Tutor. Remora triggers and David draws it. But now Consecrated Sphinx also triggers. In response though, David casts the Drawn Gamble. He searches his library for a Blasphemous Act and randomly discards Timur Battle Rage. Archivist of Ogma triggers, and David responds to it by flashing his Blasphemous Act, triggering Lotho and Darcy, surveilling an Urza Saga to the grave. Bal gets another treasure, and Josh hard casts a Force of Negation, being left with 1 card in hand. Hullbreaker Horror triggers, and once again he chooses to bounce Ley Line of Anticipation. While it was already targeted once, it is way down the stack and he wants it gone. Remora also triggers, and David activates Sensei Stop in response. Josh pays for it, and then David casts a Flusterstorm. Storm count was quite big, but despite Josh being able to pay for it, he just lets the font bite the dust. He does mention that is not going to happen, and as last resort, with now 4 treasures tapping for 8 mana, Bal activates Keenan, hoping to find Gilded Drake, but only 5 lands is what he finds. Leyline is then bounced, and Josh starts activating Thrasius, cracking 2 treasures at a time. He finds a Tidespout Tyrant, then a Mystic Remora, then a Crop Rotation, which he promptly casts, sacrificing Mana Compass as an additional cost, triggering Hullbreaker Aura and choosing to bounce Blasphemous Act back to David's hand. Remora triggers, and he doesn't pay. However, David chooses not to draw, as he knows the top card, and that would give 2 draws from the Sphinx. He finds a Gaia's Cradle into play, and Archivist triggers. Elder prays for that silence, but it's not what he draws. Consecrated Sphinx triggers, and Josh draws 2 more. The last Archivist of Ogma trigger now resolves, and it's the table's last possible way out. Will Elder draw into something able to stop this machine? Well, he didn't, and still provided 2 more draws to Josh thanks to the Sphinx. At this moment, nearing the 3-hour mark, players see the writing on the wall, as Josh is now able to demonstrate a loop where he can cast 1 spell to bounce David's Mystic Remora back to hand. thanks to Hullbreaker Horror, and from there he can cast another spell bouncing Chromox back to his hand, recasting Chromox for 0, not imprinting anything, only to bounce Sol Ring back to his hand. Thanks to Hullbreaker Aura, he is able to demonstrate a loop to produce infinite colorless mana. From there he can draw a Twill with his Thrasios and finish his opponents with a huge finale of devastation. GG. Thank you for joining us for today's match, everyone. Some might have not noticed, but Arnold Scrapgorger played a crucial role in this match, denying David of his well-needed graveyard. Leyline of Anticipation allowed David to play his favorite role as control player, without needing to compromise to permanent casts or controlling the stack. Just drawing 15 cards gave him quite some momentum, and despite being slowed by Chaos Warp and Swords to Plowshares, he found his 5-mana Dog Side that gave him the game through the help of his other tutors. We'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons, and especially Izanagi, Aajimo, Drunken Housecat, Pina, Ricardo and Zinan, our stack breakers. If you want to support us, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing or by becoming a patron yourself. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and a comment below, it greatly helps the channel by slowly teaching the algorithm. You can also take a look at one of these videos here.